Good morning. It's Wing Commander Cassidy, and I'm actually going to show you how I'm making pizza for the event on Monday for 493 Squadron. So this is the process to actually make the dough, so you actually know how it's all made. So we're actually going to use a calculator. So I use the Uni calculator. You can see the calculations there. And what I do is I'll calculate the amount of dough balls I want, the size I want, and I'm going to do it in batches of 8 because the actual mixer won't do more than about just over a kilo in of flour plus the water mix. It's about 2 kilos in total. So I'm doing it in batches of 8 dough balls at 250 grams. And what we end up with, there's some calculations for what we need. So one is the amount of flour. So I'm using 00 grade flour. I need 1,124 grams of that. I'll also need then some actually dried yeast. Because I'm actually going to do it over a 48-hour period in the fridge, it's going to use quite a small amount. I'm actually using a very special scale over here that's going to weigh that out. And that'll be 2.1 grams of yeast. We'll then add 843 grams of water to it. And we'll also include some salt, 34 grams of salt we'll put in there as well for the total mass. But it's like 2 kilos of dough, so it's not a very large amount. And then finally, the hydration. So when you talk about pizzas, you talk about hydration levels. So with this, it's 75% hydration, which means it's 75% water to the volume of flour. So we calculate it based on that. So that gives you what I'm going to make in the mix. So I'm going to start off with my flour. So I've put a bowl onto the scales. I'm going to turn the scales on and make sure it's zeroed with the actual bowl on there, because I'm not interested in calculating the difference between the two. I want it to be zeroed and then just measure the flour. So what I want to do now is measure that flour into there, which is 1,124 grams. I'm going to measure into there. I'll just open my flour. Like I said, this is 00 grade flour. This is Tesco's. I use a variety of different ones to make pizza dough. So we'll start off with flour. I know this is about a kilo in total. So I'm going to add all of that, which takes us to 1,013. And I've got some more pizza flour in this container. So I'm just going to top it up to get to my total weight of 1,134. Just a little bit more. And there we are, 1,134. So I've got my total weight of flour now. So I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to use that for a little while. And the next thing I need to do is measure up my water. And the way I do that is make sure there's 2/3 of the water is cold water and the last third is boiling water, and then you'll end up with the right temperature for the water. So I'm just going to put 500 milliliters, which equates to 500 grams of cold water into here. So that's my 500. I'm going to put it on the scales. And what I'm going to do is zero it again. So I'm now to 0. So all I need to do now is look at the difference between what it was. So it was 843. So I need 343 grams of boiling water, which is just boiled in the kettle. So I'm going to add 343. And there we are, 343. And so it's quite a large amount of water because the hydration in this is going to be 75%. So, fair amount that's going into there. What I'm going to do next is put that water into the mixing bowl. So that's in there ready to go. And the next thing I need to do is to weigh out my yeast and salt. So I've got a small glass to put onto the scale. I'm going to zero that again. I'll take out my yeast. I bought a fresh one because it doesn't last massive amounts of time. You need to sometimes buy a new one. And I'm looking at 2.1, so it's quite a small amount. So it's zero. It again, it wasn't quite zero. And then 2.1, we're looking for grams. So there we are, 2.1 grams. So it's quite a small amount, but because it's going to ferment over a long period of time, you don't need a massive amount. So I'm going to drop that into the water. And then the next thing is the salt. So it's quite a reasonable amount of salt. I'm going to weigh it into the glass, same as before. So that's my 36 grams of salt, and I put that into the water as well. What I'm going to do first of all is put a beater on there. I'm going to try and mix that yeast through the water. So I put that onto the mixer, and we're going to put that on. And that's going to just mix up the yeast in there to get the yeast and the salt into the water, and it should start to activate with the water a bit and sort of moisture. It'll get the yeast started. The next thing I'm going to do is start to have my flour. So I've got my flour here, and I've got a large spoon, which I'll put inside the flour container, and I'm going to start adding the flour 1 spoon at a time. And what I'm doing is waiting until it gets to like a pasty, like a paste inside the bowl, and it's mixing around to a paste. And what I'll do then is turn it off, change the beater to a kneading hook, and then I'll actually tip all the flour in there. So I'll do that all in one go. So you can't see into here, but it's starting to turn into a paste of the volume, and we normally get to about half of the flour in there before we put the rest of it in. I think that's the point we need to be. So just wait till that's mixed in. And what I'm going to do is stop the machine. I'm going to take this beater off, but make sure all of my flour and water is in there. So scrape it all off. Take that off. Put that to one side because I've got to do this 4 times. So this is just one of those 4 sets. I'm going to tip all of the flour in now. That's all of my flour in, and then I'm going to put a dough hook on. So the dough hook's on, lower that back down, and again turn it on. And what we're going to do is wait for that. So what I've got to do now is wait until the dough comes together as a dough, because at the moment it's just like loose flour and some of that paste in the bottom. So what it's going to do is mix through, and then eventually what we'll have is a dough form, and then I'm going to leave it 10 minutes to actually knead. So I'll wait till it's come to a dough, and then what I'll do is I'll stop the video and then restart it afterwards, and we'll carry on with the actual process after that. So we can see it starting to come together in there. I'm not sure if you can see from there, but you can see inside, it's starting to form a dough. Whereas before it was just, like say, loose flour on the top and the paste below, and it'll gradually mix it all together. And what the dough hook does, it effectively stretches the actual starch that's in the actual flour, and pulls the gluten around to create like a web of gluten in there. And that's what we're trying to create this web, which creates a structure for the dough. So what the dough is starting to do now is stick at the bottom, and then the hook is then pulling it around, so it's stretching it around and pulling out those gluten strands. So that's going to go for another 10 minutes. Time-wise here is 9:40 at the moment. So what I'm going to do is leave that 10 minutes, and then I'll come back to you when we've got to that point. So welcome back. So we've had this going for just coming up to 10 minutes. So it's actually beating around. You may not be able to see it in there, but it's actually stretching it around. You can see it's creating those strands of gluten inside there. So again, if you celiacs, you don't use this flour. You'd have to use something that's maybe based on that rice flour that doesn't have a gluten, but it uses the starch instead to do it. So I'll turn this off now. So we've come to the end of that process. I'm going to lift it back up. You can see how stretchy that dough has become. It's quite wet because it's a quite high amount of water, so it's 85%, but it'll change as it ferments, and then when we actually come to boil it and then to pull it to become pizza, it'll be much easier to work with. I'm going to take the hook off so that I can get the bowl out, and what I'm going to do is put it into this container. While you've been away, I've also weighed out flour, water, yeast and salt for the next batch, and what I'll do is eventually put all 4 into this container. So I'm going to take this off of here. You can see that dough is now formed inside there. I'm going to then put it into this container. So this and the other 3 batches that I'm going to make will sit to proof for a little while, but then what I'll do is I'll put them into the fridge. So they'll be at 4 to 5 degrees centigrade for about 52 hours. So that'll be up till about 5 hours before I need to actually boil the dough. So I'll take it out, leave it for 5 hours to come to room temperature, and then I'll separate into 250 gram dough balls. I've got some trays. I'll lay them all on the trays with some flour, and then we'll leave those for at least 2 hours to come up to double the size, and then we can use them to make pizza at that point. Hopefully that's interesting. So I'll go through the measurements again. So what we've done is we've used OO grade flour. We've done 1,124 grams of flour. We've used active dried yeast, 2.1 grams. We've used water, 843, and we've used salt, 34 grams. And the reason why we've got so much water is because we've got this 75% hydration. So it's 75% water against flour. So it's 100% flour, 75% water. So it's nearly 1-to-1 in there to make it. So that's why it's so moist. But what will happen when we actually bake the pizza, it makes the crust much nicer. It actually comes up really nicely, when it's done that way. Right, so I'm going to post this onto Facebook when we've finished. So you'll be able to watch this again through Facebook anytime you want. But again, this was done specifically for 493 Squadron, so they can actually see how the dough has been made for their pizza. What I'm going to do on Monday, during the day, I'm going to make the pizza sauce, and I'll also record how that pizza sauce is made, so you've got that information as well. Thank you very much.